Chapter 38.
The Sizzling Sixties. Introduction. In this lengthy and tumultuous lecture, you will learn all about the raucous decade of the 1960s in America. The biggest roller coaster thrill ride in our history up to that time, including a few rides that went off the rails with tragic results. It was, as Charles Dickens wrote about the French Revolution much earlier, the best of times and the worst of times. But our revolution was cultural too, so everything was up for grabs. All previous assumptions about what the country meant, what our proper role in the world should be, and even who the American people were open for debate and redefinition. Pop singer Aretha Franklin succinctly summed up this theme in her hit song, Respect, in 1967. You will learn about the major fault lines in the fracturing politics of a fractious decade, which included the growing civil rights movement, the new and rising youth culture. Those baby boomers you learned about last time were now teenagers. The murderous and seemingly pointless Vietnam War, the rise of the feminists, who turned out to be more than just an angry collection of lesbians and women who couldn't get a date, the irritatingly intractable Cold War with the Soviet Union and with their sleazy and brutish communist sycophants, and the appearance of the generation gap, which turned out to be more than merely the self-absorbed teenaged angst of the baby boomers. You will learn about all of these conflicts and about the decade's new, energetic, and charismatic president, John F. Kennedy, who you met at the end of the last lecture. And you will learn how Kennedy intended to bring order out of all of this cultural chaos. From Rosa Parks to national parks, from teaching Americans to respect each other, to teaching Khrushchev to respect America, Kennedy had a full helping of challenges and responsibilities on his presidential plate every day of his too brief 1,000-day reign. You will learn all about his plans, tactics, and strategies to refashion and to inspire the country to become once again the tip of the spear in that intractable and eternal fight, to remain a beacon of light and liberty to enlighten and illuminate a suffering world, to give our allies persuasive reasons to emulate our example, and our enemies persuasive reasons to fear it. You hear Kennedy's intentions clearly in his inaugural address, which is included in one of these lectures. You will learn how Kennedy intended to bring to fruition his ambitious agenda, both at home and abroad, by using a new tactical technique to maximize the effectiveness of the limited resources available to him to get the job done. You will learn about the philosophical foundations of Kennedy's intentions, and how and why he picked his battles to move the country forward to the fruition of its destiny, as he envisioned it. You will get the full background briefing on the Vietnam War, which during Kennedy's 1,000 days required him to fish or cut bait, to commit or capitulate, as the pressures mounted for him to make a decision about both the seriousness and the validity of our intentions there. You will learn what he wanted to do, and what he tried to do, about Castro's communist Cuba, a problem left over from Eisenhower's raucous decade of the 1950s, a problem which Castro had served up to Uncle Ike, literally as Eisenhower was trying to get out the door of the Oval Office to enjoy a well-deserved retirement. Now, Castro sent Kennedy an engraved invitation to try and unseat him in his sugarcane communist workers' paradise if he dared to do what Eisenhower had not had time to do. But since the blustering Castro was really only a blabbermouth sycophant water carrier for his roly-poly big brother in Moscow, all he really succeeded in doing was arranging a boxing match between Kennedy and Khrushchev. You will learn how that came out, both in the short term and in the long term, for both national leaders. Meantime, back home, while Kennedy was parrying with Khrushchev over Cuba, he was at the same time trying to direct a fire hose onto the rising conflagration of civil discontent and disobedience, which was shaping up to be what would soon be called the Civil Rights Movement. Everybody, not just Aretha Franklin, was demanding respect. But Kennedy's challenge was to create the conditions that allowed everybody to get respect together at the same time. In those days, that was like trying to teach table etiquette to the country's 800-pound gorilla in the living room. You will meet all the iconic heroes of the movement and their angry antagonists, learn how and where the lines of battle were drawn between them, what their respective tactics and strategies were, and what the outcome was for every encounter, as well as for the movement as a whole at the end of the decade. From king to clan, from freedom dies to freedom rides, from the March of History to the March on Washington, it's all here in these two lectures. Blow by blow, scene by scene, as the drama of the civil rights movement unfolded, observed, regrettably, by Kennedy's sightless eyes, for he was laid in his grave shortly after his measured charisma catalyzed the movement into a crusade, but observed, nevertheless, in the land of the free and the yet-to-be free, in the real world, for all the world to see, as the cacophony of the sizzling 60s wrote in blood and passion this new and unforgettable chapter in American history. Lyndon Johnson, Kennedy's vice president and successor, finished Kennedy's work, wrote a new Magna Carta for the movement, and an epitaph for Jim Crow, all at the same time. Then he followed those achievements with even more ambitious projects of his own, and you will learn all about that as well. Johnson, in the end, turned out to be the most ironic character of all in the drama of the sizzling 60s, as if the muse of history were punishing him for some error of cosmic injustice he had committed in a former lifetime. Never did an American politician aim so high for his country as he did. Never has any public figure been brought so low, so quickly, as he was. No assassin was needed to terminate all his hopes and dreams, for his own hubris turned out to be the silver bullet that pierced both the heart of his country's vilest demons and his own heart too. His life was the stuff from which Shakespeare could have written a play to rival the tragedy of Hamlet. Still, for all of that, the sizzling 60s was more a crucible of becoming for the country than it was a lament of dreams denied for its many martyrs, whose blood and passions were the fuel which enabled the larger triumph in the end, and was, in the opinion of any of the players on the stage of that memorable decade, not too high a price to pay for the purchase of a new birth of freedom for future generations. Lyndon Johnson may have suffered a private torture in his passing over a very private river Styx to account for his sins on the other side, but even from there, his enemies, both here and there, could not have disagreed that he deserved a laurel of recognition for having lived large and dreamed big on behalf of the American people. He never has gotten that recognition from historians, by the way. Maybe you can change that. We close this account of the sizzling 60s in early 1969, a bit short of the fulfillment of the chronological decade, because the election of late 1968 brought not only a new leadership to the country, but, more importantly, portended a new attitude toward, and a new strategy for, the art of governing. Gone now were the idealistic motivations of the Kennedy and Johnson era, which put the sizzle in the sizzling 60s, and dared Americans to be the best that they could be. Now the authenticity of that hopeful, if quixotic, attitude was replaced by a more Machiavellian methodology, conniving, secretive, manipulative, distrustful of the people, arrogant in its assumptions, self-absorbed, and self-contained. It etched a chapter in the American history book that more simmered with national bipolar dysfunction than sizzled with the honest, patriotic, dishes-throwing conflict we had gotten used to in the 60s. In fact, the next lecture is called the Simmering 70s, and with that perfunctory nod to the necessity of our duty to march on, we say a fond, bittersweet adieu to the sizzling 60s, as we would to an old friend who has now laid down with his fathers in the book of our national memory.